Professor Anthony Staines joins me now. And Anthony, you're an epidemiologist. You're also Professor of Health Systems at Dublin City University. You're very welcome to KCLR Live. We love to explain issues to our listeners, to go behind the story a little bit. And one of the big topics on our show this week was masks, and still a big topic, but specifically the fact that some of our listeners have been in hospital lately and they've been perplexed that they're the only ones wearing masks as patients, and they're not always seeing healthcare wearing them, and they're asking me why.
Okay. Well, first things first, this is how you wear a mask. I'm going to just move my headphones for a second. And the bit you want to cover is your nose. And the drawback is your glasses steam up, but that fades after a few moments. And the idea is just that you're protecting other people. You know, what happened when all this started, there was quite a bit of discussion in the scientific community about masks and whether they could stop you picking up a virus. And the consensus was no. There's quite a bit of evidence that says that masks don't affect your risk of being infected very much. But what became clear over the course of maybe the first month of the epidemic is this virus spreads in droplets. And when you sneeze, you spray out little wet drops, which everyone's experienced at some time. And that's where the virus is. Other viral infections you spread in aerosols, which are much smaller particles. So if you wear a mask over your nose, because that's the important bit, what it does, it stops you spreading to other people. And it's in the nature of this work. You never get conclusive evidence. But countries that have had high rates of mask wearing, generally the virus has gone down faster. And there are mathematical models of how the virus spread that say that even a mask which only reduces transmission by 60%, which is a reasonable estimate, would have a very big effect on the overall transmission of the virus. Because the way this virus works, it spreads in close contact. It spreads in crowded, poorly ventilated places. If you design somewhere to spread this perfectly, it would look like a nightclub. It would look like a cruise ship. It would look like a crowded pub. Wearing a mask reduces the risk of transmission. And as part of a number of other actions, it could help us drive this virus down to zero in Ireland. It's not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to make transmission less likely. And if we can do that, we can make the virus disappear.
Why is it that it seems, but I don't know the evidence of this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it would appear that our level of compliance with wearing masks in supermarkets, and I've mentioned already, even for instance, in hospitals in some cases, is not as good as it is in some other European countries here in Ireland.
Yeah. It's not. We did a survey led by my colleague Aka Balinga in Galway last week, and the people who responded to our survey, I think about 40% said they were wearing masks. But just looking around my own neck of the woods in North Dublin, it isn't that high. It may be higher in other parts of the country. What we're doing at the moment is we are relaxing the restrictions which have kept the virus in check. The virus is still circulating in our community. So we're still getting cases out there in Ireland, and we don't know where they were infected from. And the likelihood is that, as has happened in Israel, as has happened in the southern United States, as has happened to an extent in Portugal, we will get more cases. And the issue is, how do we respond to that? So our best bet now is to actually, all of us wear masks. You know, I have a mask around my neck. I mean, I'm at home. There's no earthly need to wear a mask in your own home, particularly on your own. But if you're outside, if you're going into a shop, if you're going on public transport, if you're going into a pub or a restaurant, you should be wearing a mask. You saw probably the videos from the Black Lives Matter protests last week, the week before. Most of the protesters were wearing masks. And one of the things that has maybe surprised some people is that those protests have not led to a spike in infections. And probably that's because everybody's wearing masks. So it's very likely pretty effective. If you're going to a cinema, you should be wearing a mask.
Or that they were outside, maybe? Would that be something to do with it, that they're out in the fresh air and that there was a certain social distance?
Outside is huge, but I mean, we would say probably there's no real evidence for wearing a mask when you're walking the streets outside. But clearly in a crowd like that, where there's a large number of people all together. So say you were waiting to go to a football match, where there might be 200 people, 300 people, all in one place. You should probably wear masks there, even though it's outside. So 300 people outside has a lowish level of risk, but you can make the risk a lot lower by wearing masks. And we've seen, I mean, there's a case in Florida that's been extensively reported. 19 people infected in a pub by one person. Now, the person who infected them didn't know they were sick. They felt perfectly healthy. They had maybe a little bit of a sniffle, that was it. But they still managed to infect 19 other people. Now, I gather all those people are well, which is good, but you can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee that somebody you infect won't have a serious illness. And that's what we're trying to stop. So if we bring this virus right down, we get two things out of that. One is we get protection. We get safety for people who are vulnerable. And in some ways, it's a bit like vaccination. We vaccinate children against measles, not because most children will suffer severely from measles, but because a small number of children will die from measles. So we vaccinate everybody to protect a small number. We don't know who the small number are, but we don't say, well, sure, it's fine. We lose 2 or 3% of our children every year from measles. Well, there's more babies coming along. That's not acceptable. We don't do that. And in the same way, it's not acceptable to say, well, this will only kill a couple of hundred people if there's another outbreak of virus. That's a couple of hundred people whose families have lost a loved one. Maybe children have lost a grandparent, parents have lost a son. Whatever it is, it's a tragedy, and it's a preventable tragedy.
Okay.
So we need to do this.
Could we talk about the healthcare then as well? Because the listeners were interested in just seeing themselves when they're in the waiting areas, for instance, that the healthcare staff, very few of them were actually wearing masks. Now, they may have been able to social distance, they may put them on when they see their patients, but their observations are that they're not the numbers, they aren't all wearing the masks. It's not mandatory. It's not happening everywhere.
I think it should. I think it's up to people who work in the health services to kind of give a steer to everybody else. I understand it. Your risk of infecting somebody you walk past in a hospital corridor is very low, but it's not zero. And this is a group of people who are more exposed to the virus than most people. We've had a very high rate of COVID-19 infections in healthcare workers. And I think for those two reasons, both as a signal and because they are at relatively high risk of being infected, I'm disappointed that healthcare staff are not widely wearing masks. The places I've been myself, they have been wearing masks. My GP, the local pharmacy. I went to have an X-ray in Vincent's. Everybody I saw was wearing masks, and I hope that will continue and spread. I mean, we're talking here about surgical masks. These are the little blue paper masks that people wear, not the kind of respirators that you've seen people using in intensive care units and places like that. So they're a step up from the cloth mask I'm wearing, but not much.
Okay.
And they're relatively cheap, so we should be wearing them, yes.
And certainly we believe they're available as well. So
Yeah,
we'd hope that that issue has been resolved. Just in relation
I
to
hope
the
so.
scenes today in the UK, so it's Thursday today, hottest day of the year in parts of Ireland, 32 degrees in parts of the UK, and lots of people flocking to beaches. We've seen pictures from Bournemouth. And are people in any real danger if they're crowding on beaches?
Yeah, they are. There's been a massive outbreak of COVID-19 in Israel, which was triggered by essentially people going to the beaches for Shavuot. About, I don't know, about 10 days ago was the holiday. Um, and it seems almost certain that they were infected at beaches or on transport going to the beaches. So I would be seriously worried. Britain is a country, England is a country where the response to coronavirus has been terribly poor. The virus is coming down, but it's still nowhere near under control. And I would be very worried that in 3 or 4 days' time, we will see a big spike in cases as a result of people going to the beaches. And I understand the frustration. I sympathize. I mean, I'm fortunate enough, I live beside the sea. I don't have to go very far for this. But I understand why people want to get out, because it's been intensely frustrating. But the risks of getting out in crowds are really high, especially in England. But they're relatively high here too. I wouldn't be very happy if there were. I mean, I live in Skerries, North County Dublin. I wouldn't be very happy if there were 800 people on the South Beach in Skerries at the weekend.
Yeah.
No, I think that would be a risk to them and to the people of the town.
We're hearing a bit about a second spike now, a second wave. What's your gut and your experience and your expertise telling you?
I don't see that we will avoid it unless we do something. There's been a lot of conversation which says there's going to be a second wave and there's nothing we can do about it, and we just lie on our back and let it roll over us and hope it doesn't drown us. And my profession in public health, we've been working for nearly 200 years to come up with effective responses to infection. And these are not responses that require huge technological innovation. We don't need a vaccine. Vaccines would be great if we had one. If we had a vaccine, I would be rolling up my sleeve and saying, inject me.
But I'm not sure everybody would with you, unfortunately.
Well, maybe. But it doesn't alter. We haven't got a vaccine. So
Yeah.
what's important now is that we do the stuff we have. And the stuff we have is wash your hands, wear masks, sneeze into tissues or into your elbow, maintain a reasonable distance from people around you. You catch this stuff by close contact in poorly ventilated spaces with crowds of people. That's how it's spread. So we saw in South Korea, for example, where they had brought the virus down to practically zero. They opened the nightclubs and a large number of people went, with the best intention in the world. They went to have a nice time out, but they started a significant outbreak of COVID-19 in Seoul, which had been largely spared up to then. Now they've brought it under control because the Koreans are good at that. But we had, Paddy Mallon was talking at the Oireachtas COVID group today, and he reckons that testing and tracing is still not fast enough in Ireland. And I'd have to say I agree with him. And if we have a significant outbreak, what's happened over the last couple of weeks is the staffing for tracing in particular has been cut right back. And it's cut back to the number of cases we're having now. But if there's an outbreak, it will be quite difficult to ramp it up again quickly. So it's very much in our interests to get that sorted, to be ready for testing and tracing on a large scale if we need it, but also to do the stuff that will ensure that maybe we don't need it. We've seen in northern Spain, in the province of Huesca, there are 3, what are they called? Comunidades closed because there's been a spike of COVID there. The Germans have closed North Rhine-Westphalia, which is considerably bigger than Ireland, because of a serious outbreak of COVID in a meat plant there. So there's stuff we should be doing. We should be looking at meat plants asking, why is COVID spreading in these places? What can we do about it? There's a strong suggestion that it's spreading not so much on the working line, but in the cloakrooms, in the cafeterias, in places like that, where the workers are crowded together. And that's fixable. We have managed, I think, to bring the outbreak in nursing homes under control. I mean, it should not have happened in the first place, but we've now got it under control. And if we can bring this down to zero, what they call crushing the curve, our options become much wider. We can do a lot more. We can say to visitors, come into Ireland, we'll test you when you come in. And there are available rapid tests. There's even one from an Irish company. We can use those. We get your results in something like 15 minutes to an hour, which would be a pain going through an airport. But it's a lot less painful than being quarantined for 14 days after you arrive. And it means we can keep the airports open. It means we can keep tourism open. So there's a lot of stuff we can do.
Though, Anthony, do you see that happening? That sounds very sensible. It sounds like a great idea, but from a resource point of view, will they actually do that?
If you think about how much tourism income matters to Ireland, I think there's 250,000 people work in tourism and hospitality. Now, obviously, that's not all based around foreign visitors, but a significant piece is. So it's in Spain, it's 12% of GNP, which is why they've opened up, because they really had to. But here we could open up. And yes, it would be fiddly. Yes, it would be expensive. But in the grand scheme of things, when you think about how much tourists bring to the country economically, I think it's doable. And many countries that do testing are charging people. If you want to fly to our country, that's great. You're very welcome. But we charge you €50 for a test on your way in the door. So there's various ways of managing it, but we haven't made a political decision that we want to bring this virus down to zero. At the moment, the political decision is to let it drift and continue at its current level until we get a second wave, and surf the second wave as best we can, then let it continue to low level till we get a third wave and a fourth wave, and however many waves we end up getting. We know from other countries that even if we do bring it down to zero, there will be outbreaks. There's a small outbreak in New Zealand right now. There's a big outbreak in Germany. There's a middle-sized outbreak in South Korea. But in each case, they've dealt with those, not by closing the country, but by closing a small part of the country and coming in with very aggressive public health interventions and dealing with it as we deal with outbreaks of other conditions.
Okay.
If we got
Sorry. Go ahead. Apologies.
If we got a call, if we got an unexpected test result back, say that somebody in Ireland had something like cholera, which very unlikely to happen, but if it did, we would just mobilize the public health team. We would descend on wherever that person was. We would test everyone around them. We would clean the whole place. We would look after the sick person, and we would look after the people who've been in contact with them, and the outbreak would stop. And you often never hear about outbreaks in Ireland because that's what we do. That's the job, basically.
That's what you do, but now you've been propelled so much into the headlines every day, and we've learned an awful lot from experts like yourself when you talk about educating us all on the measures that we can take. And there's so much public health advice out there now, but there's this word responsibility that there's the advice, and that a lot of it is not legislation now. So we have to be responsible as individuals. We have to make up our own minds, our own decisions based on the public health advice that's there. So that brings me on to a question from a listener who knew we were going to talk to you and who asks, what's your opinion on booking a flight to go abroad with your family on holidays later in the summer? How would you feel about navigating the airport, and are we better off to go to Kerry or Cork or to staycate?
I think the airports will do everything they can to make you safe. I know what people in Spain are really worried about now is English tourists. And not in any malevolent or malicious way, but England is a country with a high prevalence of coronavirus, rather poor public health response to it. So the risk of traveling is not zero. It is relatively safe. The airlines have put a lot of work into making sure that the air filtration in the aeroplanes works. We're only really going to find out about how well it works for this particular virus when we have a number of people traveling who are infected. To my knowledge, there haven't been any major outbreaks that have been traced back to planes. I could be wrong about that. So, speaking purely personally, I am staying in Ireland for the summer. I've now booked 2 days in Leitrim, which should be pleasant.
Lovely.
I might get down your part of the world as well, time and bookings permitting. But it is for each person to choose. It's not an insanely risky thing to do, but it's not zero risk either.
Okay, some really great
common sense.
Some really great advice, and I know the sunny southeast would welcome you very much. And our local economy here in Carlow, Kilkenny, we've got beautiful sites, the River Nore and the River Barrow. So hopefully you'll get down to see us. And we thank you very much for recording with us today.
Thank you very much, Eimear. A pleasure.